The phone rang at 3:47 a.m. That alone was enough to jolt me awake. No one calls at that hour unless something is wrong. Emergencies, hospitals, police. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, heart already racing, eyes burning as I squinted at the screen. Unknown caller. I almost let it ring. Almost. Something in my chest tightened. A strange pressure I hadn't felt in years. My hand was shaking when I swiped to answer. Hello. My voice came out rough. Half asleep for a moment. There was only static, soft, crackling, like wind brushing against a cheap microphone. Then I heard it. A voice I knew better than my own. Dad? My blood ran cold. I sat straight up in bed. Every muscle in my body locked. Dad, the voice said again. Quieter this time. Open the door, I'm so cold. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the mattress. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My mouth was open, but no sound came out. My heart was slamming so hard it felt like it might tear through my ribs. That voice. It was Evans, my son. My son who had been dead for 4 years. I stared at the phone like it was a live grenade. The call was still connected. I could hear faint breathing now, shallow, uneven, just like when Evan had asthma attacks as a kid. No, I whispered. No, no, no. I picked up the phone again, my fingers numb. Who is this? I said. This isn't funny. Static, then a soft sound, teeth chattering. Dad, please, it's freezing out here. Out here. My eyes drifted against my will. To the bedroom door, closed, locked. The house was silent. Too silent. Even the old refrigerator downstairs, which usually hummed all night, seemed to have stopped. Evan? I said, hating myself for saying the name. If this is some kind of joke? I don't have shoes, the voice interrupted. You told me to grab them, but I didn't. Remember? My stomach dropped. I did remember. My stomach dropped. I did remember. The night everything went wrong. 4 years ago, it had been raining hard. Evan was 15. Tall for his age. Always forgetting things. Shoes, jacket, phone charger. That night, we argued because he wanted to walk to his friend's house during the storm. Take your shoes, I had snapped, annoyed after a long shift. I will, he'd said, already halfway out the door. He never did. My knees gave out and I sat back down on the bed. This isn't real, I whispered. I'm dreaming. The voice on the phone started to cry, soft at first, then harder. I don't like it here, Dad. It's dark. And they keep telling me to come back. They? I asked before I could stop myself. The crying stopped. Silence. Then, please open the door. I hung up. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just slammed the red button and dropped the phone like it burned. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then my phone buzzed. Incoming call. Unknown caller. I stood up so fast the room spun. My legs felt weak, like they couldn't hold my weight. I backed away from the bed, my back hitting the wall. No, I said out loud. Leave me alone. The phone stopped ringing. I stood there in the dark, breathing hard, listening. That's when I heard it. A sound from downstairs. The front door handle. Turning. Slowly. Click. Click. Every hair on my arm stood up. I hadn't moved from my bedroom since going to sleep. The house was locked. I always checked. Twice. After Evan died, I became obsessive about it. Click. I crept toward my bedroom door, every step careful, silent. I pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. Then, Dad? The voice wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was coming from downstairs. My vision blurred. Tears filled my eyes before I even realized I was crying. That's not possible, I whispered. You're gone. I unlocked my bedroom door with shaking hands and opened it a crack. The hallway was dark. Moonlight spilled through the small window at the end, casting long shadows across the floor. The house smelled wrong, damp, like wet earth. Another sound. A soft knock. From the front door. 3 gentle taps. The way Evan used to knock when he came home late and didn't want to wake me, my chest felt like it was caving in. I moved down the stairs, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles ached. Each step creaked loudly, announcing my fear to the house. Dad, the voice called again. Clearer now. Closer. Why aren't you opening the door? I reached the bottom of the stairs. The front door stood in front of me, solid, ordinary, the same door. I'd repainted last summer to keep myself busy. The knocking came again. Tap, tap, tap. I reached for the deadbolt. My hand froze inches away. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Evan always knocked twice. Not 3 times. Always twice. I swallowed hard. "Evan," I said through the door. "If that's you, say something only you would know." Silent. Then softly. "You used to sing off-key when you made pancakes." On purpose. To make me laugh. A sob tore out of my chest. That memory wasn't in any photos. Not on social media. Not in police reports. It was ours. My hand dropped from the lock. "What do you want?" I whispered. "I want to come home," he said. "It's cold, Dad, and they're getting closer." The porch light flicked on. I hadn't touched the switch. Light flooded through the peephole. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I leaned forward and looked. At first I saw nothing, then movement. A figure standing just beyond the glass. Too tall, too thin, bare feet planted on the wet concrete. And when the figure lifted its face toward the door, I staggered back, gasping, because the face staring at me looked exactly like my son, except his eyes were wrong. They were completely black, and behind him, reflected faintly in the glass, I saw others standing in the dark, waiting, and Evan's voice whispered through the door, "Dad. They said if you don't open it, they'll come inside anyway." Stumbled backward until my shoulders hit the wall. My lungs burned like I'd been running, but I hadn't moved. The front door stood between us, between me and whatever was wearing my son's face. "Dad," Evan's voice said again, softer now. "Why are you scared?" "Because you're dead," I wanted to scream. "Because I buried you. Because I held your cold hand in a hospital room and begged you to wake up." I pressed my palm flat against the wall, forcing myself to breathe. In, out, the porch light still, shone through the peephole, casting a thin halo around the doorframe. Behind the glass, I could still sense them, not moving, not breathing, just waiting. "I can't open the door," I said, my voice cracking. "You're not real." There was a pause. Then the thing outside sighed. That sound, tired, patient, was worse than the knocking. "You always say that when you don't want to face something," it said. "Remember when Mom died?" My stomach twisted. That was another memory no stranger should have. My wife Laura died when Evan was 9. Cancer, fast and brutal. I spent months pretending she was just away, unable to accept the truth. "How do you know that?" I whispered. "I was there," the voice replied. "I watched you sit on the kitchen floor for hours. You didn't think I noticed." Something scraped softly on the porch, bare feet shifting. I glanced back at the peephole, then forced myself to look again. Evan stood closer now, too close. His nose was almost touching the glass. The skin on his face looked stretched, like it didn't quite fit. Veins pulsed faintly at his temples. And those eyes, endless black, stared straight through me. Behind him, the others were clearer now. 3 shapes, human, but not. Their limbs bent the wrong way. Their heads tilted at angles that made my neck ache just looking at them. They didn't have faces, just smooth, pale skin where eyes and mouths should be. I staggered away from the door. "No," I said. "You can't come in." Evan frowned. The expression was perfect. Confused, hurt. "They said you'd do this," he murmured. "They said you always hesitate." "Who are they?" I asked. His gaze flicked sideways for just a second, toward the faceless figures. "They helped me find you," he said carefully. "They said you'd make everything warm again." A cold realization crept up my spine. These things didn't want Evan. They wanted me. The lights in the house flickered. Once, twice. Then every light went out. I was plunged into darkness so complete I couldn't see my own hands. The porch light died, too. From outside, I heard whispering. Not words, just a wet, overlapping sound, like many mouths moving at once. Evan's voice cut through it. "They're getting impatient, Dad." I backed away blindly until I hit the kitchen counter. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me flinch. A notification. I pulled it out with shaking hands. New voicemail. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. I hadn't received a voicemail in years. I pressed play. Static filled the speaker. Then a familiar sound. Rain. Heavy rain hitting pavement. My throat tightened. The voicemail crackled. Then Evan's voice came through, young, scared, breathless. "Dad, I messed up. I shouldn't have gone out. I can't see. There's a car!" The sound of screeching tires cut off the message. The voicemail ended. I dropped the phone. That recording shouldn't exist. The police had told me Evan died instantly that night. They said he never regained consciousness. There was no call. No message, nothing. Yet I'd just heard his last moments. Outside, something thumped against the door. Not a knock. A push. The door shuddered in its frame. "Dad!" Evan called, panic creeping into his voice. "Please! They're saying I have to go back if you don't let me in." "Back where?" I yelled. Silence. Then very quietly, "To the place where it's always cold." Another shove hit the door, harder this time. The deadbolt rattled. I snapped into motion. I ran to the kitchen, fumbling through drawers until my hand closed around the old baseball bat I kept for emergencies. I gripped it like a lifeline and backed toward the living room. The front door creaked. The handle turned. The lock held, for now. "Dad," Evan sobbed. "It hurts." I pressed my back against the wall, bat raised, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have stopped you. I should have gone with you." The whispering outside grew louder, more excited. Evan's crying stopped abruptly. When he spoke again, his voice was wrong. Flat. "Empty. That's why they chose you," it said. "You still belong to us." The door slammed inward with a deafening crack. The deadbolt snapped clean off. The door flew open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the stench of rot and rain. Evan stood in the doorway. Up close, the illusion shattered. His mouth opened too wide. His jaw unhinged slightly, stretching past human limits. The blackness in his eyes spilled down his cheeks like ink. Behind him, the faceless figures surged forward. I screamed and swung the bat. It passed straight through Evan's head. No resistance. No impact. Just freezing air. I fell backward, scrambling away as the figures poured into the house. Their feet never touched the floor. They hovered inches above it. One reached for me. Its hand was long and pale, fingers fused together like melted wax. Before it could touch me, Evan stepped in front of it. "No," he said sharply. The faceless thing recoiled. Evan turned to me. For a brief moment, his eyes weren't black anymore. They were brown. His real eyes. "Dad," he said urgently, "you have to listen. I'm not supposed to remember." "But I do." "Remember what?" I sobbed. "The accident wasn't an accident," he whispered. "And I'm not the only one who never left." The house shook. Cracks spread across the ceiling like spider webs. The faceless figures hissed furious. Evan grabbed my wrist. His hand was ice cold. "They're lying to you," he said. "And they're lying to me. If you want this to stop, if you want me to rest, you need to find the truth about that night." The figures lunged. Evan shoved me backward, away from them. I hit the floor hard. When I looked up, the front door was gone. The house was whole again. Silent. Empty. Evan was gone. Only one thing remained. My phone buzzed. A new text message from Evan. "Dad, they know you remember now." I didn't sleep. I sat on the living room floor until dawn, my back against the couch, the baseball bat resting uselessly across my knees. Every sound made me flinch. The tick of the wall clock, the pipes settling, the wind brushing the windows. I kept expecting the front door to burst open again, for cold air to spill inside, for Evan's voice to call my name. Nothing happened. When the sun finally rose, it felt wrong. Too bright. Too normal. Like the world had decided to move on without my permission. I checked the front door. It was intact. Deadbolt fixed. No cracks in the frame. No sign anything had happened. If it weren't for the text still glowing on my phone, I might have convinced myself I'd lost my mind. "Dad, they know you remember now." My hands trembled as I locked the phone and stood up. "What do you want me to remember?" I whispered to the empty house. The answer came from somewhere deep inside me, a place I'd sealed off 4 years ago. The night Evan died, I grabbed my keys and left the house before I could talk myself out of it. The police station smelled the same as it had years ago. Coffee, disinfectant, and old paper. The familiarity made my stomach churn. I hadn't been back since the accident report was finalized. A young officer at the desk looked up. "Can I help you, sir?" "I need to see the report on my son's accident," I said. "Evan Miller, 4 years ago." He frowned slightly. Those files are archived. You'll need to submit a request. I was told I could access them any time, I said, sharper than I meant to. He hesitated, then sighed. Wait here. While he disappeared into the back, memories clawed their way up. Rain, sirens, the smell of wet asphalt. A cop gently holding me back while they covered Evan's body with a tarp. They said a car lost control. They said it was quick. They said there was nothing anyone could have done. The officer returned with a thin folder. Too thin. Here you go, he said. That's everything. I took it with numb fingers and sat down at a metal table. The pages felt flimsy, insubstantial, like they couldn't possibly contain the worst moment of my life. I flipped through them slowly. Time of death. Weather conditions. Witness statements? Then I froze. The witness section listed one name, not multiple. One witness. That wasn't right. There were others, I muttered. They told me there were several people who saw it happen. The officer shifted uncomfortably. That's what's in the file, sir. Who is this witness? I asked, tapping the page. He glanced at the name and looked away. A local resident. Lives near the intersection. Still lives there? Another pause. Yes. I closed the folder. Where? The house was only a mile from where Evan died. A small, run-down place with peeling paint and overgrown hedges. I parked across the street and sat there for a long moment, staring at it. Something about the place made my skin crawl. The air felt heavy, like before a storm. I forced myself out of the car and walked up the cracked path. When I knocked, the door creaked open almost immediately. An old man stood there, hunched and pale, his eyes watery but sharp. Yes, he said. My name is Daniel Miller, I said. You were a witness to my son's accident. His face changed instantly. Fear flashed across it. I already talked to the police, he said quickly. I don't know anything else. You're the only witness listed, I replied. That doesn't make sense. His lips trembled. You should go. Before he could close the door, I spoke again. He called me last night. The old man went very still. You shouldn't have said that, he whispered. What do you know? I demanded. He looked past me, down the street, then back into his dark house. Come in, he said quietly. Before they notice. Inside, the house was cluttered with religious symbols, crosses, candles, handwritten prayers taped to the walls. The air smelled like melted wax. They told me not to talk, the old man said, wringing his hands. They said if I did, I'd end up like the others. The others? I asked. There were 3 kids, he said, voice breaking. Over the years. Same place, same night, same rain. My heart slammed in my chest. My son wasn't the first? I whispered. He shook his head. No, and he wasn't the last. What really happened? I asked. The old man sat heavily in a chair. That night, he said, your boy wasn't hit by a car. Not at first. My vision blurred. What do you mean? I saw him stop, the man said. Right there at the intersection. He heard something. A voice. Cold dread crept over me. A voice? I repeated. He stepped off the curb on his own, the man whispered. Like someone called his name. My stomach twisted violently. He was confused, the man went on, looking around. That's when the car came. Too fast, too late. I staggered back, gripping the edge of the table. That's not what the report says, I said. They changed it, he replied, because they didn't want panic. Because they didn't understand. Understand what? The old man looked at the candles, at the crosses, at the walls covered in frantic writing. There are things that linger, he said. Things that pretend to be lost loved ones. They feed on grief, regret, guilt. My phone buzzed. I didn't need to look to know who it was. But I did anyway. Evan. He's telling you the truth. The old man's eyes widened. You see? He whispered. They're listening. Why Evan? I asked, tears streaming down my face. Why my son? Because you blame yourself, the man said softly. That makes the door easier to open. The words hit harder than any blow. I did blame myself, every day. If you let them in, the old man continued, they don't just take you. They stay. They grow stronger. That's why they keep trying. Then how do I stop them? I demanded. He hesitated. There's only one way, he said. You have to go back to where it started. And you have to refuse them, out loud, without doubt. My phone buzzed again. Evan, Dad, please hurry. They're getting angry. The lights in the house flickered. The candles went out all at once. Cold air rushed through the room. From somewhere behind me, I heard familiar footsteps. Slow, batter. Dad, Evan's voice said softly. Why are you listening to him? I turned. Evan stood in the doorway, but this time he wasn't alone. The faceless figures crowded behind him, filling the hall, their presence pressing in, suffocating. The old man screamed. Evan smiled. And this time there was nothing human left in it. You were never supposed to know, Evan said. But it's too late now. The walls began to crack. The house groaned. And Evan took a step toward me. The old man's scream cut off abruptly. Not fading, not echoing, just gone. Like someone had flipped a switch. I stood frozen in the center of the room as the walls shuddered and the floor vibrated beneath my feet. Evan stood inches away now, his smile stretched too wide, his shadow bending unnaturally across the ceiling. Behind him, the faceless figures pressed closer, filling the hallway. The doorway, the space itself. The air grew painfully cold, each breath burning my lungs. Dad, Evan said gently, mockingly, you came all this way. Don't stop now. The old man lay slumped in his chair, eyes open, unmoving. I didn't need to touch him to know he was gone. Rage surged through my fear. You used him, I said, my voice shaking. Just like you're using my son. Evan tilted his head. No, he replied calmly. We used you. The house groaned again, a deep sound like something enormous shifting underground. You want the truth? Evan continued. Fine, we didn't choose him. You did? The words punched the air from my chest. What are you talking about? I shouted. That night, he said, stepping closer, you were angry, tired. You didn't walk him home. You didn't watch him cross. You closed the door and went back inside. I shook my head. Stop. And when he stepped into the rain, Evan whispered, his voice splitting into overlapping echoes. Something else hurt him. Something old. Something cold. Something that knew how to sound like love. The faceless figures leaned forward as one. He wasn't hit because he was careless, Evan said. He was called. My legs buckled, but I stayed standing. No, I said through clenched teeth. That's not how this ends. Evan frowned. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Dad, he said, his voice flickering, human for half a second. You're supposed to open the door. I saw it then, the truth beneath the lie. This wasn't Evan. Not fully. It was a shape wearing his memories, feeding on my guilt, my grief, my endless what-ifs. The real Evan, the boy who laughed at my off-key singing, who forgot his shoes, who hugged me too tight, was trapped somewhere behind those black eyes, and I wasn't going to let them have him. I turned and ran. The rain was pouring when I reached the intersection. Same as that night. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, warped shadows across the wet pavement. Cars passed occasionally, oblivious, their tires hissing against the road. I stood on the curb, heart pounding, phone clenched in my hand. Dad, Evan's voice whispered from behind me. Don't do this. I didn't turn around. The faceless figures gathered at the edges of the street, their forms blurring, stretching, as if the darkness itself was folding inward. You came here to refuse us, Evan said. But you don't know how. I closed my eyes. The old man's words echoed in my mind, out loud, without doubt. I stepped forward onto the slick pavement. No, I said. The word felt small at first, fragile. The shadows trembled. I won't open the door, I said louder. Not to you. Not ever. The streetlight above me burst with a sharp crack. Darkness swallowed the intersection. Evan screamed. Not in anger. In pain. Dad, please, he cried. I don't want to go back. My heart shattered, but I didn't stop. You're not mine to take, I said, tears streaming down my face. And I'm not yours to keep. The shadows surged toward me, freezing the air, clawing at my chest, my memories, my regret. I stood my ground. I forgive myself, I said, voice breaking but steady, and I let you go. A sound like glass shattering ripped through the night. The cold vanished. The shadows collapsed inward, folding, shrinking, screaming without mouths. And Evan looked at me one last time. His eyes were brown again. Real. He smiled softly. I love you, Dad, he said. Then he was gone. I woke up on the sidewalk to flashing lights and concerned voices. Someone had called an ambulance. They said I collapsed from exhaustion. They said I was lucky. They didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear what I heard. Weeks passed. Then months. The house stayed quiet. No calls. No knocks. No whispers. The nightmares faded. I started sleeping again. But sometimes, just before dawn, I wake up at 3:47 a.m. And for a moment, the house feels cold. Then I remember. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. And some goodbyes save more than they destroy.